do. So I think he has. We haven't heard from him since, but Travis did help us. He helped us find this beautiful place. Thank you, Trav. You're a good guy.
Yes, what a wonderful story. And the fact that you could then give him permission to leave and go to where he's supposed to be. That's touching as well.
It is touching. It is touching. And some of these souls that come here, they just don't find the right place and the right time, I think. And then they have a real hard time moving on. So
yeah,
we need to sometimes help them with that. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great advice for anyone in dealing with tragedy like that, suicides and those kinds of things. There is probably some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, even for folks like that. And your story is just fantastic. I love that. Oh man, thank you for relating that, Joanne.
Yeah, that's a real current thing. Yes.
Oh, it is.
But the universe kind of had to hit me. It had to kind of hit me over the head with this. I didn't even see the ghost down there. It was there, obviously. And for him to manifest, look, of course, isn't Dustin 24? How old is Dustin?
That is about right.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that angle,
Me
but
neither
that's true.
till now. Maybe that's why Dustin could see him. Because of all the people in the family, even the in-laws, Dustin is about the least psychic one.
Except that I think it's kind of come out that he may have been exposed to some other experiences along the way.
Yeah.
He may be somebody who can see things.
Right.
He doesn't want to admit it.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah. So. Yeah, well, but that was pretty cool.
I think there's a lot of 24-year-olds out there right now that you are getting very curious about their life. So that's kind of a byproduct of your story there.
Yeah, but the universe does that. That's why people really need to pay attention to any kind of synchronicities, anything that occurs that's unusual, especially repeater stuff, or stuff that you think, whoa, why did that happen, or is that weird, or what?
I do believe in that. I think the universe sometimes sends you very clear messages when you're doing the right thing in your life and when you're doing the wrong thing, and you need to listen carefully.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, those synchronicities, I think, are probably some of the most important things that come at us with a message.
That's right.
Well, Jim, listen, before we get off the air here, I think we've got about 14 minutes left. If you could do us all a favor and relate to us this famous crash retrieval case that kind of got you going when you were a cop at one point, because there was a major event down there in southwestern Washington that you were one of the responding investigators on. Is that correct?
Well, I did it, of course, on my own. This was not an official assignment, but the date in question is November 25th, 1979. This was a Sunday night of a 4-day Thanksgiving Day weekend, and I did not find out about this event until this is where the great irony. I started with the Aberdeen, Washington Police Department as a rookie cop on May 20th of 1979. Of course, you don't see a lot of daylight when you're a rookie, and I did not subscribe to the newspaper. If I had subscribed to the Aberdeen newspaper, I would have seen a headline that would have startled me greatly. On the next day, on November 26th, 1979, I would have seen a headline that would have read, UFO crash in Elk River, ? That was article number 1 of 5 newspaper articles. Now, wow. I did not see any of that until several years later. In fact, it was right after I joined MUFON. I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion tonight how I came to find out about the National UFO Reporting Center, MUFON in Seattle, all of that. I had been, ever since I started with the police department, Well, in the beginning, you don't let other policemen know that you're interested in UFOs because, policemen are the world's worst practical jokers to each other. And if you're the new guy, they are merciless. And so you really don't want to tell them something like, I believe in UFOs, okay? That's not going to be a good time. But eventually, when you've been around long enough, I had been there several years, and by then you're an established member of the department, and I could dish it out as well as I could take it. So I started talking to people about UFOs. And I kept hearing people, they kept saying, something crashed in the woods outside of Westport. I heard this from, different officers. I heard it from deputy sheriffs. Everybody knew some piece of this odd story. So I thought, what the heck? Let's go dig it up. So I go to the local library, which of course was where I eventually met Joanne. But they had a file because so many people had come in and asked about this crashed UFO. They had a folder with all the newspaper clippings. Well, the newspaper clippings identified all the original witnesses. So, this was not a real difficult investigation. I went from witness to witness to witness and got their stories. And then I heard about other witnesses. And I even interviewed people, loggers, who had zero interest in UFOs. But a lot of loggers like to fight. And these guys bragged to me about standing up to these soldiers that were blocking the logging roads when they tried to go to work the next day. And take it from me, there shouldn't be any military down there at all. There's no reason for them to be there. These are just logging roads out on the coast. There's no military reservation there. There is nothing there that the military would care about, unless, of course, something really special crashed. Well, the beginning part of the story starts almost 40 miles away out by Elma, which, of course, Elma is halfway, between Aberdeen and Olympia, Washington. Olympia being on the Interstate 5 corridor, the state capital. You go 50 miles to the west, you get to Aberdeen. There's a couple of rivers that empty into Grays Harbor. And in fact, Ocean Shores is at one end and Westport is at the other, 30 miles in each direction. So everybody is talking about that night. You find these people. I talked to the dispatchers. I found some of the people who actually saw it. They're driving down the highway and they see this really bright object come down out of the sky, and it looks like it's on fire. And there's varying descriptions of how fast it's going. I never was quite able to decide, was it changing velocity, or is this a matter of difference of perception? But I could take each person's account. I would ask them where they were exactly, what direction did you see the object come from, and what direction did you see the object leave? And you could trace this all out on a map. And it was very precise. I eventually came up with, there was a woman named Estella Kressel out in Central Park, which was 10 miles out, is just about 4 or 5 miles outside of Aberdeen, halfway between Montesano and Aberdeen. And she was able to tell me, this is 7 years later, she remembered which Sunday night movie of the week she did not get to see the end of. It was Oh God, by the way, was the name of the movie. And she did not get to see the end because she saw this extraordinary thing go across her big picture window in her house. And she was completely stunned by it. She said it had windows, and it was bigger in the front than it was in the back. And the way that she described this encounter, it was almost like a psychic encounter, because she kept saying, they're in trouble, they're in trouble. I kept thinking, my God, they're going down, they're going down. And she saw this big craft headed towards Westport coming down out of the sky. And she was worried that they were in, dire peril. I found people, there was one gentleman, this is back in the days, it was pre-911, so all of the departments had their own dispatchers. He had gone down and pounded on the front door of the Westport police station, and he was extremely upset because he was on the Elk River Bridge. He saw this thing coming down out of the sky, and it changed direction. Now, I don't know whether it changed direction to avoid hitting Westport or to avoid going into the Pacific Ocean. It could have been either one. But it went across the mudflats and crashed in the hills. Okay, I had numerous witnesses to that part of the story. That's part one of the story. Part two of the story is the military response. It appears, based upon how quickly they were there, that they already knew that this thing was coming down. And a lot of my witnesses were law enforcement, deputy sheriffs, officers from other agencies. Like one officer, he was off duty with his family, and he was driving in the Westport area within that week, and he sees all these military vehicles going by. I talked to another man who saw an unmarked car pull up to a phone booth. Now, you got to bear in mind, this is before everybody had a cell phone and whatnot, so the technology is, different than it is now. This guy had a phone booth down at the end of his driveway. He saw this staff car pull up, and somebody with an officer, like a field-grade officer's uniform, gets out of the car, goes in the phone booth, has an extensive phone conversation, hangs up, and leaves. I have all these odd puzzle pieces like this. Eventually, the military they were questioned about it. They claimed that it could have been a helicopter with a faulty exhaust manifold. There were all these stories going back and forth. Nobody was missing any aircraft. There was an official search conducted under the auspices of the Air Force, I think Scott Air Force Base, assigned it a search number. There were no missing aircraft, no missing helicopters. Nobody was ever able to come up with any other explanation, but something crashed down there in the hills, and whatever the something was, the military came and got it. Well, I kind of wrote this whole... Pardon?
There was a military presence after this supposed crash?
After it crashed, yes. Yeah. They were there for a couple of days, and they blocked the logging roads, and they did something, and then they were gone. And I heard accounts, one person said they saw helicopters carrying something slung underneath.
Oh, my.
Like cargo copters.
Yeah.
There were different versions of this from various people, but kind of all pointed the same way. Well, I kind of wrote this off to, I figured it was somebody's screw-up. And something almost hit Westport, Washington, and rather than admit it, the military covered it up. So yeah. I had this, I didn't really do anything with this story until several years later when Joanne and we started going to the UFO crash retrieval conferences in Las Vegas, and Joanne said, why don't you do something about Westport? And I told her, I said, well, it's probably just a man-made thing. And she said, let me look at the file. Well, Joanne discovered a report that I had kind of overlooked from a gentleman who was a very, very well-known research scientist who did a lot of public outreach. He would talk about all of the sea life in Puget Sound, highly respected, numerous degrees. He claims that he saw UFOs in the sky over that area, not the night of the crash, but the next night.
Oh,
I interviewed him.
Yes.
I interviewed him. He was very definite in his responses. He told me everything he did that day. and he told me about driving back to Westport that evening, getting down to the Johns River area,